charge your capacitors, because today we're unleashing some motive force on the enemy with a review of the Admech Electro Priests. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, the strategy focused 40k channel, where we're all about getting the most out of our miniatures on the tabletop. In today's video we'll be looking at the two flavours of Electro Priest available to the Adeptus Mechanicus, looking at their datasheets, any combos and synergies on the board, and how I would personally think about using them in a game of 40k. I've been looking forward to having a look at these guys ever since they got some new rules and a stratagem in Engine War. In the background, Electro Priests are fanatical warriors of the Adeptus Mechanicus, with the ability to wield powerful blasts of electricity as a weapon of war. They're a subsect of the cult Mechanicus that worship the motive force, without the power of which they believe that no life could exist. With their cybernetic implants, they can channel energy through anything that they touch, either charging or draining capacitors and unleashing stored power on their enemies, as the Corpuscarii like to with their gauntlets, whereas the Fulgurites prefer to drain the living energy from their enemies' bodies with their electroleech staves, channeling the stored energy into a powerful defensive field. In any case, they are some of the most elite warriors of the Adeptus Mechanicus, and a true asset on the battlefield when these fanatical warriors are unleashed on the foe. So let's take a look at what they can do in game. So if we start by looking at the Fulgurite Electro Priests, these guys are 14 points a model, have a movement of 6, weapon skill 3+, ballistic skill 4+, strength and toughness 3, 1 wound, 2 attacks, leadership 8 and a 6+ save. They are further protected by their Voltiggeist field though, which gives them a 5+ invul on top of this. You can run absolutely enormous squads of Fulgurite Electro Priests should you want to, and you can have up to 20 of them in the same squad for a total points cost of 280 points, though this really will be quite a big investment for a relatively fragile unit, at least until they kill something. They're armed with electroleech staves, which don't cost any more points. They're strength +2, so strength 5 typically, AP -2, and damage D3. Furthermore, each time you make a wound roll of 6+ for this weapon, the target suffers D3 mortal wounds instead of the normal damage. Now at strength 5 with decent AP, multi-damage and a mortal wound mechanic, these guys really are pretty much anti-anything in close combat. They'd probably best excel with going through toughness 4 Primaris Marines, but really there's very little that they aren't going to be effective against. Typically 10 of them are going to go through about 5 intercessors on the charge, or about 11 orc boys, or rip about 8 wounds off a standard toughness 7 or toughness 8 vehicle. Not enormously stand out on any case, but incredibly solid damage against basically all targets. The mortal wound mechanic in particular really helps against high invul saves and also against hordes. Furthermore, if they do manage to kill something in the fight phase, then they get far harder to remove for your opponent, and when their unit destroys another enemy unit, their invul save is increased to a 3+ for the rest of the battle. Their Voltiggeist field can make them even more dangerous on the charge, just with another little mortal wound mechanic, which means for each model in the unit that makes the charge, you roll a dice and on a 6, the target of the charge takes a mortal wound. So again, with a 10-man unit, that's going to get you an extra 1 or 2 each time you make a charge. Finally, much like their Corpuscarii brothers, they also have Fanatical Devotion, which is a little bit of extra survivability as it's basically a 5+ feel no pain type save, ignoring a wound on a 5+ every time they would take one otherwise. Despite this and their 5+ invul, I think they are still really quite fragile point for point, at least until you can get some siphoned vigour for wiping out an enemy unit. Following that, they're far more problematic to remove. So let's take a look at their Corpuscarii counterparts then. These guys are 12-point models, so a little bit cheaper, with the 5+ invul save from their Voltiggeist field and extra mortal wound impact hits on the charge, and Fanatical Devotion for the extra 5+ feel no pain. Again, you can take them in units up to 20, but instead of having that electroleech stave and the ability to drain energy from a destroy unit and get a better invul, they're instead equipped with electrostatic gauntlets, which they can use both in shooting and melee. Unlike the Fulgurites, they have a 3+ ballistic skill and a 4+ weapon skill, so they're a bit better at range than in combat, and those electrostatic gauntlets make a very similar attack in either. At range, they're 12-inch Assault 3 weapons with Strength 5, AP 0 and 1 damage, and have an exploding 6s kind of rule where each hit roll of a 6+ with this weapon causes 3 hits rather than 1. The fact that it's 6+ is interesting, as it does mean that they won't be anywhere near as effective against shooting anything with a -1 to hit, meaning that you'll never be able to roll a 6+, but if they do acquire themselves some sort of bonus to their ballistic skill, such as say having Daedalus as the Blackstone Fortress character nearby them, then every roll of a 5+ will be getting those extra hits as well. On average though, without this buff, the priests will on average get about 3 hits each, the extra hits pretty much accounting for their loss of hits due to ballistic skill. You'll really be able to stack on the saves against enemy infantry with these guys. A unit of 10 of them for 120 points will be putting out a whopping average of 30 hits on enemy units at strength 5 AP nothing. It's kind of hard to talk about this attack without talking about their stratagem. They do have that excellent one from Engine War, which is 1 command point to make these attacks AP-2 as well. If you're firing with a reasonable number of these in a unit, and your enemy has a 4+ save or better, then that's typically going to be a very good option in terms of getting extra damage. For example, 10 Corpuscarii with just this buff, no other character support or anything, will kill on average around 7 Primaris Intercessors or 14 Tactical Marines, which is pretty decent damage output for a fairly cheap unit. They can of course use those electrostatic gauntlets in combat as well, where they're not quite as strong to be honest. They do only get 2 attacks and they only hit on 4s rather than 3s, but that's still going to be a reasonable amount of extra hits, particularly as each hit roll of 6+ also explodes and causes 3 hits rather than 1. So again, certainly going to stack some decent saves here. From a unit of 10 Corpuscarii in combat, on average we're going to get something around 17 hits from them. So again, that will be a lot of strength 5 hits that the enemy has to weather with their armour. You really don't want to meet these guys if you're playing a horde. So in terms of combos and synergies in-game, these guys will both very much be fans of Canticles of the Omnissiah, including some of the unique Forge World ones. The Chant of the Remorseless Fist could always give them a little bit of extra damage output, and Invocation of Machine Might could be usable for +1 strength, although only going from strength 5 to 6 is only relevant against some targets. For the Corpuscarii, the Benediction of the Omnissiah for just rerolls of 1 to hit in the shooting phase might actually just be the best bet after all. In terms of the Forge World specific ones, I think that Lucius's Luminescent Blessing is probably the best for these guys. Going from a 5+ invul save to a 4+ invul save is really quite a decent durability buff, particularly for the Corpuscarii, as they can't even improve their invul save even if they do kill a unit. Riser's Citation and Savagery isn't bad either, an extra bit of AP doesn't hurt either of these units. In terms of the Forge World dogmas themselves, Mars's Canticle Manipulation can always be useful, plus their Wrath of Mars stratagem is particularly strong on the Corpuscarii. Theoretically you could have up to a unit of 20 of these, so with an average of 60 hits on enemy units that's going to lead to a lot of mortal wounds. Metallica, if you're foot slogging the Corpuscarii, could be candy, and particularly the Fulgurite will quite like Riser for Redding Cog and Claw, rerolling wounds in the fight phase. As always, Styges 8 is also pretty decent, as both of these guys are wanting to get up really close really fast. Being able to get a pre-game move off with a Styges 8 stratagem, whether that's for a foot slogging unit or a unit in a Dune Rider, is really quite strong. Even Graia's refusal to yield is actually quite decent on very expensive 1-wound infantry. So I think that these guys really are quite a flexible unit that can be played in multiple Forge Worlds. I'd say that Lucius, Styges and Riser are probably my favourite for these guys though. In terms of custom Forge World dogmas, there's also a few that we can use here. Radiant Disciples from the Rad Saturated one can reduce the amount of impact that enemy range shooting has on these, though I'll admit that the secondary benefits aren't exactly overwhelming. Much like Riser's Dogma, the accelerated actuators of the Expansionist Forge World could be very good on both of these units, particularly on the Corpuscarii to give them AP-1 with those strength 5 attacks in combat. And not caring about moving and shooting assault weapons is also good for the Corpuscarii via rugged explorators. In terms of delivery systems for these guys, you can either foot slog them, deep strike them if you're Lucius, which is quite a reasonable one in combination with Corpuscarii Priests, which can really deliver quite a lot of strength 5 firepower right to enemy lines, or we can take one of the transport vehicles that are available to us, either Transvector, Terrax Assault Drill, or the Scorpius Dune Riders. I think Dune Riders do have a pretty decent pairing with these guys. They're fast and fairly resilient point for point, and they can charge into close combat to tank enemy overwatch should that be an issue. As the unit size is pretty flexible, then you can also have room for some character support in the same Dune Rider as well, so it could be a good combo to throw data losses in. The Terrax Drill is basically another way of getting you some deep strike, and it can transport up to 12 priests, or priests plus a few characters, and then once it's arrived you can get some use out of it in terms of destroying enemy buildings with its melter cutter. I think that the priests are one of the better uses of its transport capacity, being fairly expensive and fairly damaging infantry threats. Finally, the Transvector I do think probably comes up short compared with these two, though it does have a few interesting abilities of its own and some interesting stratagems. As for being an Archaeopter, it's the transport capacity of 6 that I think really lets it down for me. Really, I think you want a few more models in the units to be able to deliver a decent punch. They can just be a little bit underwhelming when there's only 6 of them around. We mentioned characters, but we'll do so again. Naturally, Belisarius Call or Tech Priest Dominuses can be handy if you do need reroll 1s in the shooting phase for the Corpuscarii. Manipuli Tech Priest can be handy for an extra +1 to charge if you manage to meet a Manipulus with a unit that's coming out of Deep Strike or jumping out of a Terrax. And we mentioned him already, but Data Losses has absolutely beautiful synergy with the Corpuscarii, with his +1 to hit triggering their extra Tesla shots, as well as giving them just better accuracy as a whole. If you were running a Dune Rider or 2 full of Corpuscarii, or having them jump out of a Terrax drill, then he's pretty much an auto-include for me. Against the unit that he's buffing, you're going to be getting around about 4.5 hits per model rather than 3. So I think it's a very good deal indeed. Finally, as ever, those Holy Order Warlord traits are well worth an include if you think about dealing significant damage with these units. We've mentioned them before and I'm sure we will again, but there's one for exploding 6s to the hit roll, which would be great with the Corpuscarii, and the same traits could be used to reroll charges to get those Fulgurites in combat. Certainly could be good to add on to a Dominus or Manipulus to buff them in whichever way you see fit. Finally, in terms of stratagems, we have already mentioned Electrostatic Overcharge. That's the 1 command point one from Engine War, where the Corpuscarii Priests get an extra AP -2 on their weapons. Only in the shooting phase though, sadly, but this one's an excellent deal. There's a 3 command point one for Electro Priests as well, Zealous Congregation. This allows you to fight a second time with the Electro Priest units. I think more geared towards Fulgurites this one. If it's going to make the difference between them killing a target or having it live to deal damage next turn, it could well be worth it. Acquisition at any cost for 2 command points. This is the one where you add +1 to your saving throws if you're near an objective, and you also get to increase the attack characteristics of the models by 1. This can be incredibly powerful on these guys, as it could get you to a 4+ invul save just if you're normal with your Voltgeist shield. If you're in the Lucius Forge world, then that can improve their 4+ save by adding 1 to the rolls, and that will give you a 3+ invul save, and that does work rules as written as well. But the silliest thing that you can do is that if your Fulgurite Electro Priests happen to have killed an enemy unit, they're already at a 3+ save, you could give them a 2+ invul save with 2 command points. Could make them an incredibly frustrating unit for the enemy to shift for a turn. There are the Lucius and Synergies ones for deep strike for any unit or moving them before the game, as we've already mentioned. And of course the Wrath of Mars to give you some mortal wounds with your Corpuscarii should you be lining up against a heavy target. So quite a lot of ways to run Electro Priests overall. I do think there are multiple viable ways to use this unit. In game, if I was running the Fulgurites, I'd be most tempted to put them in a Dune Rider, likely run as Riser or Styges 8. Riser just for the extra combat prowess, or Synergies for that pre-game move to get them up the board and in the enemy's face faster. Alternatively, I think that using them as a deep strike unit with Lucius could certainly work. Maybe setting them up off the board and having them meet a Manipulus on the board to give them +1 to their charge to make it all the more reliable that they're going to get in. You could even stack that Manipulus with reroll charges, so you have a rerollable 8-inch charge rather than a standard 9-inch one. For the Corpuscarii, I would typically advise similar. I think they're a unit that really works very well in the Dune Riders, and if you were taking multiple units of them, I would absolutely include Daedalus. His synergy with their weapons is just absolutely amazing. I think that their best Forge worlds are either Styges 8 again, Lucius for the extra invul save, or Mars to be able to deploy Wrath of Mars and get some extra mortal wounds. Again, I think they would be absolutely excellent to be run as Lucius, maybe turning up turn 2 from Deep Strike when you have the Lucius Canticle active, and frying the enemy with an ungodly amount of Tesla fire, activating the stratagem to have it all -2. Theoretically, on a maxed out unit, that's 240 points, and even without any other buffs, gives you 60 Strength 5 AP -2 shots on the outlying units of the enemy army. That's really quite scary stuff and should really help peel back any enemy troops. They'll also be at least non-trivial to remove in return as well, having that 4+ invul save while in the Lucius Canticle. In terms of weaknesses, I would beware morale slightly, it could well be an issue. They are only leadership 8, so if you do lose a hefty chunk of them in one turn, then they could be running away. They're also not all that durable, and they don't really get any benefit from being in cover as well, being dependent on their invul saves. So in general they're always going to be a bit of a glass hammer unit, drop in, hopefully kill some stuff, and then probably get removed in return. Obviously unless you manage to do something silly, like combining the Fulgurites one with acquisition at any cost. I'd say that the Electro Priests certainly have a solid niche in the Codex. In terms of elite infantry with melee, I'd say that the Fulgurites are really the way to go in Admech. The Infiltrators are a bit more of a mixed bunch, both with a bit of shooting and a bit of melee, but Fulgurites really are dedicated anti-everything melee infantry, that'll do very solid damage to enemy tanks and infantry alike. The Corpuscarii are really competing for the anti-infantry role, and again I think they do their thing better than any others do. You won't beat them within the decks for glass cannon close range anti-infantry fire. Although it has to be said, a few more options that can do similar things do exist now, such as the new Taraxi and Cerberus units. In general, slightly less damage output point for point, but a little bit more mobile perhaps. Overall though, I think that the Electro Priests certainly have a solid role within the Admech army, and are a good example of a well-balanced unit that can get very strong in certain circumstances. If you've enjoyed the video, feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics for more Admech strategy videos over the course of the next few weeks in the run-up to 9th. And if you have been enjoying my videos, I'd just like to mention the Auspex Tactics Patreon page, which supports the channel, and is how I have time to make quite so many videos about model soldiers. If you have been enjoying the content recently, then any support is absolutely greatly appreciated. As well as helping keep the videos coming, channel patrons also get access to videos earlier before anyone else, with regular video previews on the Patreon. They get say in what sort of videos come next on channel Patreon polls, and there's prize draws every month where I give away some fairly large collections of model soldiers to lucky Patreons selected at random. So if any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support the channel, then you can find the link down in the description below. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.